Oh, hi. Just sitting in here enjoying the nice summer weather. I'm just kidding. It is 50 degrees out and raining out there. But today I am discussing the newest Morgan Matson book, which, if you know anything about her books, they always take place in the summer in Connecticut. So I'm dressed for summer today. I'm Ellie. This is my sidekick, Dobby. And today we are discussing The Unexpected Everything by Morgan Matson. This is about a very confident Andy, a senator's daughter who has her whole life planned out at age 17. But when her dad is involved in a scandal, which consequently ruins her resume-building summer plans, she ends up with a job she never expected: dog walking. The good news is she now gets to spend the whole summer with her best friends and perhaps a certain boy. Now, like all of Morgan Matson's books, this one is about more than just romance. There's mourning, family problems, a whole lot of friendship in it. But of course, there is that swoon-worthy romance as well. Now, if you have not read any Morgan Matson books, I would recommend reading them in order. First is Amy and Roger's Epic Detour, then there's Second Chance Summer, and then Since You've Been Gone. I actually read those three in backwards order, and because they do take place following characters that live in the same town, the characters have cameos in the later books. So I missed all of those cameos the first time through. However, I wasn't actually missing any story reading them out of order. So I would recommend reading them in order to catch the cameos of the other characters, but it's not necessary. Okay. So I really enjoyed this book. I actually read it in 2 days, partly because it was a really fun read and I couldn't stop, and partly because I was meeting Morgan Matson the day after I ended up finishing it, and I really wanted to be done before I met her so that I could be in on any inside jokes that she said. So I met Morgan Matson the next day, and apparently she's really into Polaroids, so we took a Polaroid together, and she signed it. Even she thought I was crazy for reading this really thick 550-page book in 2 days, but I enjoyed it. At first I couldn't really decide whether I wanted to give it 4 or 5 stars, but I ended up going with 4, mostly because there's one issue I had with it that just couldn't let me round up to 5, but we will get to that later. I think that's all I can say without giving anything away from the story, so if you have not read it yet, I recommend going now. Goodbye! Okay, I do have to start with one half complaint because I'll be talking about it throughout the story. This book was very predictable, which is kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing. It's a bad thing because I do like being surprised in the books that I'm reading. It's also a good thing though, because I predict them when I want them to happen, so it was following what I wanted to happen, so I can't fully complain about that, but only half complain. Anyway, let's get into what happened. When we started, I actually really thought this book was going to be about her and Topher developing their relationship, because we see her getting to know him and it seems like a different relationship than she's had with other people, but that obviously didn't happen. So quick backstory, Andy has this medical internship, but that ends up blowing up when the person that recommended her for it doesn't want to be involved in the scandal that her father was in. So he withdraws his recommendation and her summer plans are thrown away. So the only thing left for her to do is apparently walk dogs. So she gets this job walking dogs, and the first regular client that she gets is this guy that she's run into a couple times, and I totally knew it would be his house the moment she walked in. And he's awkward, and he's kind of cute, and there was clearly going to be something coming of this. So she's going to walk his dog every day, and they obviously like each other, and she's talking to all of her friends about him, and they've even nicknamed him Dog Boy because they refuse to get to know any of her boyfriends anymore because she only has her boyfriends for 2 to 3 weeks tops. And eventually, they both get up the courage on the same day to ask the other one out. And they finally go out, except when he comes to pick her up, they realize they don't know anything about each other. She didn't even know his actual last name. Turns out he's an author, and he has 2 books published, and people are waiting for the trilogy. So they go out, and he keeps trying to ask her all of these personal questions, and she's avoiding it like the plague. So it ends up being a very bad date, because she's refusing to give any actual information about her. He drops her off, and she ends up going out with her friends, and I love their reaction when they ask her how the date went. And she says, well, he got really mad because I didn't want to tell him anything personal. And they look at her like, well, yeah, that's really weird, but that's her. But she kind of has given up, and she didn't really care anyway, because she never really has relationships anyway. But she gets a call from him, freaking out because the dog ate chocolate and is sick. She ends up going over to his house and spending the night to take care of the dog. And finally, they get to know each other the way that you would at a sleepover with somebody, but the way that he had wanted to get to know her on the date. So they decide to start over the next day and have a brand new date. But when she gets home, she realizes she forgot to tell her dad that she wasn't going to be home, so she's grounded. She forgot to tell him that she couldn't go out with him anymore, so he comes over anyway. And she ends up just walking him to his car for like 2 hours, and they're talking, but she's grounded. However, for the next week, anytime she comes over to walk his dog, he walks with her, and in my head, there's a little montage going of them walking together and getting to know each other and her actually opening up for the first time. He also develops a bromance with Tom, and that might actually be my favorite relationship in the story because it's so cute. Tom was actually a fan of Clark's book series before they became friends, so it's a fanboy turned friend thing, which is kind of a dream of mine. Eventually there's this big scavenger hunt, which was this, they were talking about it for the entire book until it actually came. Clark kisses Andy to steal her key, which is probably my favorite moment in the entire book, just because it's adorable and out of character in a good way. They get into total competition mode, and Andy gets her dad really into it, and it's a bonding moment with her dad too, and I love this little section of the book. It takes you away from the story, but it is so worth it. By this point, I knew that Wyatt and Bree were kind of a thing, although apparently it didn't happen until the scavenger hunt, but I had seen it way before. But I was expecting them to be caught at the scavenger hunt and everything to blow up, but that didn't happen. It did happen a while later, however, when Andy ends up going to Bree's house and sees them together, and then tells Bree not to be honest about it because she doesn't want the friendship to die. I was so furious with Andy at that moment. You don't tell your friend to keep lying to your other friends. You don't do that. That's ridiculous. It was obviously going to blow up, which it did, and then it made it 5 times worse because not only were they mad at Bree for keeping this from them, but they were also mad at Andy for telling Bree to keep it from them. So now this entire friendship, where they've been friends for years, has just blown up, and it's terrible, and Andy is miserable because at the same time her father is talking about maybe going campaigning again, and she ends up going off on Clark and breaking up with him at the moment that he tells her he wants to stay in Connecticut to be with her. So now she's single, she doesn't have her friends, she doesn't really have her father the way she wants him, and so she calls Topher. But as she's with Topher, she finally realizes, oh my gosh, I'm actually in love with Clark. So she leaves, she goes, and the next day she decides, I have to tell Clark right now that I love him. At that moment, Palmer decides to come over to reconcile with her, and then Topher calls to warn her that her father is basically in a trap and his career's on the line, so they have to go rush and save that. Once that is taken care of and her dad decides that he wants to not campaign and to spend more time with her, they decide to go to Clark's book signing for her to declare her love in front of all of his fans, which is very Made in Manhattan in my opinion. I say that in the most loving way because I love Made in Manhattan. But the whole moment of her walking in and declaring her love in front of all of these strangers at basically a press conference, or in this case, a book signing, and then him publicly saying, well, yeah, that works for me. And then he goes over and he kisses her in front of everybody, and it's this really cute moment. And I usually don't like public displays of affection, but this was adorable. I do want to talk a little bit about Bree and Toby. They end up getting Bree and Toby on the bus as they're on their way to see Clark, and they get into a big fight, and Toby storms off. And I loved Toby's character up to this point, but I got really mad at her. I get that she was hurt, and I get that it was her best friend that hurt her, which hurts even more. And I would get it if she wasn't talking to them for like a week. But the fact that we then go months without her talking to them really is terrible. And in a way, it was nice because there was the moment when you realize that Toby and Bree had become almost the same person and they needed that separation. But I really would have liked it if we had seen them at least be friends again at the end. See, part of me, when Wyatt and Bree broke up, part of me wanted Toby to go back, but I also didn't want Wyatt and Bree breaking up to be the reason that Toby went back, because Bree was right. It's not fair for Toby to only be friends with her if she breaks up with Wyatt. So I actually kind of like the fact that she didn't go back immediately when Bree and Wyatt broke up, so that you saw it was more than that. It wasn't just about Wyatt in the end. So maybe I don't hate Toby as much as I thought. I don't know. In the end, the friend group isn't quite the same as it used to be, but Andy has learned that it's worth giving yourself over to a relationship if it's the right person. And she and her father have a much better relationship than they had before. So she's really grown as a person, and her family has grown, and it seems like everybody's at a pretty good place. The one issue I did have with this book was about the signing, which her declaration was amazing. But my one issue was when he was at the signing, he decides to read from his unfinished book, which no author, I don't think, would do that, by the way. But he does. And it's about the friends. And I was expecting him to write about the friends. I wanted him to write about the friends, but I wanted it to be a new book about the friends, unrelated to the trilogy. Because it's a little weird to have your friends be basically characters in a trilogy that you had started long before you met them. And I might be looking too far into this, but that's actually what was keeping me down at 4 stars and from putting it at 5. I couldn't get over the fact that he wrote his friends, his new friends, into his trilogy. That was weird to me. I don't know. Maybe I'm looking too much into it, but maybe it was a big deal to you too. Let me know. I would like to hear about that. I will talk to you next time. Goodbye!